Warlord Krax of the Krill hegemony surveyed the holographic tactical display, his multifaceted eyes processing the data with cold, predatory efficiency. His fleet, a swarm of 30 angular obsidian warships, hung like daggers in the void at the edge of the Viridian system. Below them, the target planet shimmered, a vibrant green and blue jewel, its surface dotted with the faint, silver glow of luminescent biodomes. A ripe fruit, waiting to be plucked for the glory of the hegemony. The conquest would be trivial. These colonists, a splinter group of the upstart species called human, were farmers and scientists, not warriors. Their world was isolated, their defenses negligible. Warlord, a subaltern's voice crackled. Long-range sensors have detected a derelict vessel in the outer asteroid field. Human design, but no power signatures. Krax's mandibles twitched in irritation. A complication. Send a scout drone. I want its logs. If it carries survivors, silence them. Patience was a virtue for hunters, and Krax was nothing if not a patient hunter. He waited. An hour later, the report materialized on his display. The human ship, a survey vessel named Odyssey, was a tomb. A micrometeoroid swarm had shredded its engines and life support 3 weeks prior. But its logs, though damaged, contained a fascinating secret. Fragmented geological data pointed to a colossal energy signature deep within Viridian's planetary crust. It was a dormant power source of a magnitude the Krill had never encountered, an anomaly of incalculable potential. A slow, reptilian smile spread across Krax's face. The conquest of this world had just become infinitely more interesting. The humans living in those silver domes had no idea they were nesting atop a power that could forge an empire or shatter a star. Their extermination was no longer a simple matter of glorious conquest. It was now a strategic necessity. Subaltern, Krax commanded, his voice a low growl of newfound purpose. Update the invasion parameters. Objective Prime remains the subjugation of the colony. But Objective Aureate is now the full seizure of all geological data related to the Viridian anomaly. No colonist who knows of it is to be left alive to speak of it. The hegemony will claim this power for itself. The fleet began to move, no longer just a wave of conquerors, but a surgical instrument poised to carve a secret from the heart of a dying world. The first volley from the Krill fleet struck without warning. From her vantage point in the Central Administration Tower, Elara Vance watched in horror as the colony's primary orbital defense platform, a repurposed asteroid mining station, vanished in a silent, brilliant flash. It had been their only real shield. Now they were naked. "Report!" she yelled, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "They're targeting the biodomes!" a frantic voice cried from the operations pit. "Dome Gamma is collapsing. Dome Delta is on fire." Through the tower's crystalline walls, Elara could see the sky burning. The luminescent domes, marvels of terraforming, that fed 500,000 colonists, shattered one by one under a relentless barrage of plasma fire. Each explosion was a death sentence for thousands, a flash of light that signified the end of a family, a community, a lifetime of work. Her people were farmers, botanists, engineers, pioneers who had carved a paradise from a wild world. They had no army, no warships, only a belief in a peaceful future. It was a belief the universe did not seem to share. "Get a message out," Elara commanded, turning to her communications officer. "All spectrum distress call. Tell them everything. Colony designation Viridian. Population 500,000. Under unprovoked attack by the Krill hegemony. We are defenseless. We need immediate military aid." The officer's fingers flew across his console, his face a mask of grim focus. The message screamed into the void, a desperate plea for salvation. Elara knew the odds were infinitesimally small. They were too far from Earth, too insignificant for the Galactic Council to care. Yet, they had to try. For hours, as the city burned and the death toll climbed into the tens of thousands, they broadcast their plea. Then, a direct hit slammed into the communications spire atop the tower. The complex shuddered. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the room went dark, save for the hellish red glow from the burning city outside. "The main array is gone," the comms officer gasped, staggering back from his ruined station. "We're cut off." A profound silence filled the room, heavier and more terrifying than the explosions had been. It was the silence of being utterly alone. But then, a young technician, a boy named Leo she'd seen in the mess hall, stumbled towards a secondary panel. "Ma'am," he choked out, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "The emergency beacon. I can reroute the atmospheric processes, core power to it. It will suffocate the lower shelters, but it'll be the loudest damn signal the galaxy has ever heard." Alara looked at him, seeing not a boy, but the terrible, beautiful defiance of the human spirit. She met his gaze and gave a single, slow nod. "Do it." As Leo worked, sacrificing the last breathable air for a final, desperate shout into the dark, Alara Vance turned back to the window, watching the enemy landing craft begin their descent. Cho, the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, 1,000 light-years from the fires of Viridian. The distress call registered as a minor alert on a subdelegate's console. The chamber itself was a monument to serene indifference, a vast sphere of polished white stone and floating delegate pods, where beings of immense age and power debated the precise tariff rates on shipments of Kyaxian silk. The alert, flagged for its unusual power signature, was eventually routed to the pod of Councillor Vorlag of the ancient and aloof Cygnian ascendancy. He reviewed the data with an air of profound boredom, his 3 eyes blinking in slow, asynchronous succession. "A distress signal," he announced, his voice a melodic chime that resonated through the chamber's translation system. "From an unregistered, human colony in the Keplerian Drift, designated Viridian. They claim to be under attack by the Krill hegemony." A few delegates shifted in their pods. The Krill were a known problem. Violent, expansionist, but predictably so. They kept to the galactic fringe, preying on those too weak or too foolish to merit the Council's protection. Delegate Shin of the Mercantile Guild, a corpulent slug-like being floating in a brine-filled sphere, made a gurgling sound of dismissal. "The Keplerian Drift is outside sanctioned trade routes. This is not a council matter. The humans knew the risks of settling in unclaimed territory. The signal indicates a significant loss of life," Councillor Vorlag added, his tone utterly devoid of concern. "And it mentions an energy anomaly." He dismissed the thought. "Irrelevant. The Krill hegemony, while distasteful, is a significant regional power. To intervene would be strategically non-viable. It would violate a dozen non-interference precedents and could disrupt the stability of the Outer Rim." "Indeed," Shin agreed. "A most regrettable but localized incident. A shame for the colonists, of course." There was no further debate. With a few keystrokes, Councillor Vorlag officially logged the Viridian attack. His final entry was a masterpiece of cold, bureaucratic detachment. Incident 734 Gamma. Unsanctioned colony. Krill hegemony action. No intervention warranted. File closed. Across the galaxy, a desperate scream for help was reduced to a footnote in the archives of beings who had long since traded their conscience for stability. On Viridian, the last echoes of hope were dying. The Council had spoken its silence, and it was a death sentence. Echo Station, orbiting the ink-blue methane ice of Triton, was humanity's lonely ear to the cosmos. It was a place of profound silence, manned by a skeleton crew of 20 technicians, who spent their years listening for whispers from the void. On this day, they received a scream. Viridian's final desperate broadcast, supercharged by the colony's dying breath, hit the station's quantum entanglement receiver like a physical blow. It wasn't just a signal, it was raw data, laced with the final terrified biosignatures of a dying populace. The station's AI, Orion, immediately flagged it. Bypassing all standard protocols, and shunting the data packet directly to the one place on Earth built for such nightmares. The Bastion. Deep beneath the granite spine of the Rocky Mountains, the atmosphere in the Bastion's command center was one of frigid calm. Here, Earth's High Command, a council of its 5 most senior military leaders, watched the data from Viridian unfold on the main holographic display. They saw the Krill fleet, the burning biodomes, the collapsing city. They heard the final, dignified plea of Administrator Elara Vance. They saw the biosignature feed flatline as the colony's life support failed. They also saw the fragmented data from the Odyssey and the reference to the energy anomaly, a detail Orion had cross-referenced and appended. There was no debate, no discussion of strategic viability or non-interference treaties. The 5 leaders looked at each other, a silent consensus passing between them. The Council's indifference was expected. Humanity's response would not be. General Wu, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, spoke a single name into the silence. Thorne. 2 hours later, Grand Admiral Marcus Thorne stood before them. He was a man of average height, with greying temples and eyes that held the quiet, patient gravity of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and the void, and had bested them both. He listened as General Wu summarized the situation, his gaze fixed on the final frozen image of Viridian's burning capital. He had seen this before, on other worlds, with other species, but this time, it was his own. The home fleet is yours. Admiral, General Wu stated, all 537 ships. Your orders are simple and absolute. Thorne did not need to ask what they were. The unspoken mandate hung heavy in the air. This was not a rescue mission. It was too late for that. This was not a punitive strike. This was a statement. A declaration carved in fire and steel. The Krill hegemony, and any who stand with them, Wu continued, his voice cold as orbital ice, are to be taught the full and terrible cost of spilling human blood. You will not just defeat them, Admiral. You will break them. You will make them a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy for the next 10,000 years. Remind them why, for all our talk of peace, humanity remains the only species that has perfected the art of war. Thorne's eyes flickered to the casualty estimate from Viridian. 500,000 souls. He gave a single sharp nod. By your command, he said, his voice quiet, yet somehow the deadliest thing. In the room, he turned and walked from the chamber, the weight of 500,000 ghosts settling on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a weapon. Aboard his flagship, the Hegemon's Wrath, Warlord Krax watched the subjugation of Viridian with immense satisfaction. His ground troops were mopping up the last pockets of resistance. His resource teams were preparing to drill toward the anomaly. It was another flawless victory for the Krill hegemony. His satisfaction was shattered by a proximity alert that shrieked through the bridge. "Report!" he snarled. "Warlord, an energy event," the sensor officer stammered, his limbs trembling. "Unprecedented scale, at the system's edge." Before Krax could demand clarification, reality itself seemed to tear open. It was not the elegant, shimmering portal of a standard hyperspace jump. This was a brutal, violent rupture in space-time, a jagged, bleeding wound in the fabric of the cosmos, glowing with the furious energy of a caged star. From this chaotic rift, a ship emerged. And then another, and another. They poured into real space, not like a fleet, but like a plague. In seconds, the void was filled with them. They were brutalist wedges of dark grey armor, scarred and purposeful, devoid of any of the aesthetic flourishes common to Council warships. They were slabs of weapons, engines, and righteous fury. At their head was a vessel that dwarfed even Krax's flagship, a colossal dreadnought whose prow seemed to drink the light of Viridian's star. UES Vanguard. The name was painted on its hull in stark white letters. 537 warships. The count appeared on Krax's tactical display, and he felt a cold dread seep into his being for the first time in his long, violent life. The humans weren't supposed to have a fleet. The Council's intelligence reports had been clear. They were a fractured, primitive species, with a handful of system patrol boats. They were centuries away from this kind of power. This armada was larger than the defensive fleets of some founding council members. "Who are they?" a bridge officer whispered, his voice laced with awe and terror. "How?" "Hail them," Krax commanded, his own voice hoarse. "Demand their—" He was cut off as the human fleet moved. They didn't assume a standard defensive posture. They didn't issue a warning. They formed a perfect, multi-layered attack wing and accelerated, engines burning with a violent blue-white intensity. They were not here to negotiate. They were not here to posture. They were here for blood. "Warlord," the sensor officer cried out, his voice breaking. They're not powering weapons. Warlord, their weapons are already hot." On the bridge of the Hegemon's Wrath, surrounded by the most powerful warships in the Krill Armada, Warlord Krax finally understood. The Council hadn't been wrong about humanity's capabilities. They had been catastrophically, apocalyptically ignorant. And he was the first of the Krill to stare into the face of that ignorance. It was the face of a vengeful god, and it was hurtling towards him at impossible speed. The human fleet did not fire a ranging shot. There was no warning volley. Their opening salvo was a symphony of annihilation, and it struck the Krill fleet with the force of a supernova. From the UES Vanguard, Grand Admiral Thorne gave the order with 2 quiet words. "Erase them." At the heart of the human formation, massive artillery cruisers, ships that were little more than colossal spinal-mounted railguns with engines strapped to them, fired in perfect unison. Tungsten slugs, each the size of a freight hauler, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. They didn't explode. They simply hit. The effect on the Krill ships was catastrophic. A Krill battlecruiser, its shields flaring brilliantly for a nanosecond, was cored from stem to stern, the kinetic energy of the impact flash vaporizing its reactor and turning the vessel into an expanding cloud of incandescent gas. Before the Krill could process this initial shock, the second wave of the human attack was upon them. Swarms of intelligent drones, numbering in the tens of thousands, were launched from human carriers. They moved not as a disorganized cloud, but as a single, predatory organism, flowing around the enemy's panicked return fire to find purchase on their hulls. Once attached, they detonated, their shaped charges methodically crippling shield emitters, point defense cannons, and sensor arrays. Their command structure is in chaos, Fleet Captain Eva Rostova reported from her station on the Vanguard's bridge, her voice a calm counterpoint to the controlled mayhem on the tactical display. "They're trying to form a defensive perimeter, but our frigates are already inside their lines." The human frigates and destroyers were a blur of motion. They fought like wolves, darting in to deliver devastating blows before rocketing away. Their primary weapons were not the elegant energy beams favored by the Council races, but brutal, short-range plasma torpedoes that burned through Krill armor plating and boiled the unfortunate crews within. A human destroyer, the Stalwart, took a direct hit to its port engine. Instead of retreating, its captain spun the crippled vessel around and vented its remaining reactor plasma in a directed wave, immolating a smaller Krill scout that had moved in for the kill. It was a tactic born of desperation and pure, unadulterated aggression. Warlord Krax watched his fleet, the pride of the hegemony, being systematically dismantled. His ships were larger, their shields theoretically stronger, but they were being outmaneuvered and outthought at every turn. The humans fought with a terrifying synergy, anticipating his commander's moves, exploiting weaknesses he didn't know his ships had. They seemed to treat their own vessels as expendable ammunition, willing to trade armor for a better firing position. "Admiral," Rostova announced, her gaze fixed on the tactical overlay. "The Hegemon's Wrath is exposed. We have a firing solution." Thorne watched as Krax's flagship desperately tried to rally its scattered forces. "Take the shot," he ordered. "Fight." Vanguard's main guns roared. It wasn't a kinetic slug this time, but a beam of coherent gravitons that warped the space around the Krill flagship. The hegemon's wrath didn't explode. It was worse. The mighty warship was twisted, crushed, and torn apart by its own mass as the laws of physics were temporarily rewritten around it. Its death was a silent, grotesque monument to a battle that had become a slaughter. The Krill had come to Viridian as conquerors. They were now becoming a debris field. While the orbital battle raged, Viridian's atmosphere began to fill with new falling stars. They were not debris but sleek, black drop pods, each emblazoned with the emblem of the Terran Marine Corps, a skull set against crossed lightning bolts. They slammed into the planet's surface with thunderous force, their ablative shielding glowing cherry red. They landed not in orderly formations, but in a scattered, chaotic pattern, punching through the roofs of occupied buildings and crashing into the plazas where Krill ground troops were rounding up colonists. The pod doors exploded outwards. From within emerged the hulking forms of human marines in Titan-class exosuits. These were not the elegant, lightweight armors of Council peacekeepers. They were 8-foot-tall behemoths of plated armor and hydraulic muscle, designed for one purpose: shock and awe. The Krill ground soldiers, who had been enjoying their cruel work, froze for a half-second in confusion. It was a half-second they could not afford. The Marines opened fire. Their gauntlet-mounted rotary cannons spat a torrent of high-explosive rounds that turned the lightly armored Krill into clouds of green mist and shattered chitin. Their movements were a terrifying paradox. One moment they were agents of pure destruction, advancing relentlessly through Krill lines, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The next, a Marine would break off, using their suit's powerful arms to lift a collapsed beam off a group of trapped Viridian children, their modulated voice offering a calm, "You're safe now, get to the shelters." This duality defined their assault. They were both exterminators and saviors. Sergeant Wrecker Riley's squad cleared a landing zone by leveling an entire Krill command post with a salvo of micromissiles, then immediately transitioned to a search and rescue operation, their suit sensors scanning the rubble for the faint heartbeats of buried colonists. They fought with a controlled, righteous fury, their comms filled not with screams or panic, but with professional, laconic call-outs. Krill squad, east flank, engaging. Found survivors in the West Hab block, medevac requested. Hostile armor, signatures detected. Someone paint them for orbital. To the Krill, it was incomprehensible. They were facing an enemy that could slaughter them with inhuman efficiency, yet paused in the middle of a firefight to administer first aid to an injured alien. This was not warfare as they understood it. It was something else, something far more terrifying. It was a force that possessed both the capacity for total war and the compassion of a medic, and could switch between the two in a single, terrifying heartbeat. Silence reclaimed the space over Viridian. Where a mighty Krill fleet had once floated, now only shattered husks and glittering fields of debris remained. The battle had been shockingly brief. Of Warlord Krax's 30 warships, 27 were disabled or destroyed. The 3 surviving frigates, battered and terrified, were fleeing at maximum thrust toward the system's edge. Aboard the UES Vanguard, Admiral Thorne gave the order to stand down from combat alert. He watched the last of the Krill ships vanish from the tactical display, then turned to his communications officer. "Open a system-wide channel," he commanded, "all frequencies, unencrypted." A moment later, his voice, calm and implacable, echoed from every speaker on Viridian, in the crippled Krill ships, and on the few fleeing vessels. "This is Grand Admiral Marcus Thorne of the Terran Alliance. To the people of Viridian, you are safe. Your world is now under the full protection of the Alliance. We will help you rebuild." He paused, letting the message of hope settle before his tone shifted, becoming as cold and vast as the void itself. "To the surviving vessels of the Krill hegemony, run. Run back to your masters. Show them the price of our blood. Tell them that their age of unchecked aggression is over. Tell them that humanity has come to the galactic stage, and tell them this." Thorn's gaze seemed to pierce through the holographic projector, to stare directly into the souls of the fleeing Krill. "Captains, you came here for conquest, but you meddled with forces you cannot comprehend. You have disturbed something in the deep places of this world. We know what you were looking for, and now we will stand guard over it. If you or anyone else ever returns to Viridian, you will not face a fleet. You will face an apocalypse." Chat transmission ended. The message was clear. Humanity had not only won, they had claimed the prize the Krill had secretly coveted. They had drawn a line in the starlight and dared the rest of the galaxy to cross it. On the Krill throne world of Kor, a planet of jagged black rock under a blood-red sun, High Lord Vorlag watched the last transmission from the Battle of Viridian. He saw the UES Vanguard appear from the rift. He saw the Hegemon's wrath twisted into a pretzel of dead metal. He heard the human admiral's final, chilling warning. For a full minute after the recording ended, Vorlag was utterly still. The assembled warlords in the cavernous throne room did not dare breathe. Then, the High Lord's immense frame began to tremble, not with fear, but with a fury so profound it seemed to suck the heat from the air. He rose to his full, terrifying height and unleashed a roar that shook the very foundations of the citadel, a sound of pure, unadulterated hatred. Humans had not just defeated his fleet, they had humiliated him. They had stolen his secret prize and broadcast his failure to the galaxy. "They dare," Vorlag hissed, his voice a low, guttural growl that promised death. "These insects dare to challenge the hegemony." He slammed a massive fist onto his obsidian throne, cracking the ancient stone. "Sound the horns of war, muster the Grand Armada. Every ship, every soldier, every reserve. We will not conquer their world. We will grind it into dust and scatter the ashes across the void. We will make their memory a curse." The news of the Krill's full mobilization sent a wave of panic through the Galactic Council. In their great chamber, delegates who had dismissed Viridian as a fringe incident now clamored for emergency sanctions and diplomatic intervention. "We must stop this," Delegate Shin burbled, his brine tank churning with anxiety. A full-scale war between the hegemony and the Terran Alliance could shatter galactic stability. Councillor Vorlag, whose previous boredom had been replaced by a quiet dread, merely stated the cold truth. "It is too late for diplomacy. We ignored the cub's cry, and now the parent has come. The Krill will not be stopped by sanctions. This is a blood feud now." The council had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed the conflict would be contained. They had failed to understand that for humanity, there was no such thing as a limited war when their people were slaughtered. Now, two of the galaxy's most ferocious powers were on a collision course, and the council could do nothing but watch in terror as the storm they had allowed to gather prepared to break. The Krill Grand Armada entered the Sol system with the silent, inexorable arrogance of a glacier. 3,000 warships, a river of dark metal that flowed past Neptune and Uranus, ignoring the distant planets as trivialities. High Lord Vorlag, seated on the command throne of his new flagship, the inevitable Annihilation, watched his prey. On the main display, a small, blue-green marble, third from its star, Earth. Humanity's fleet, battered and depleted from the Viridian campaign, met them near the orbit of Saturn. It was a pathetic display. A mere 200 ships, forming a desperate defensive line. Vorlag almost laughed. "Begin the cleansing," he commanded. The forward elements of the Grand Armada surged ahead, weapons blazing. The human ships fought back with a ferocity that bordered on madness, but they were hopelessly outmatched. They broke and scattered, trading space for time. A squadron of human destroyers made a suicidal charge, only to be vaporized by the overwhelming firepower of a single Krill dreadnought. It was a massacre. "They are falling back to Jupiter," a sub-commander reported, his tone laced with contempt. "Their fleet is in full retreat." "As expected," Vorlag sneered. "They have courage, I will grant them that, but courage does not stop an avalanche. Pursue them. Do not let them regroup. We will shatter them against the gas giant and feast on the wreckage. The bulk of the Grand Armada, sensing a swift and glorious end to the war, pushed their engines to the limit, plunging headlong into the chase. They streamed past Jupiter's great red spot, their sensors locked onto the fleeing human ships. They paid no mind to the dense asteroid fields or the swirling electromagnetic storms of the Jovian system. It was all just terrain to be crossed on the way to their final victory. This was their fatal error. As the last Krill warship cleared Jupiter's orbit, Grand Admiral Marcus Thorne, watching from the bridge of the Vanguard deep within the asteroid belt, gave his quiet command. Spring the trap. Across 1 billion miles of space, the trap was sprung. The asteroids were not asteroids. They were weapon platforms, their rocky shells falling away to reveal city-sized mass drivers and batteries of plasma torpedoes. The empty space between Jupiter and Mars was not empty. It was seeded with thousands of cloaked graviton mines. The human fleet that had been fleeing was not fleeing. It slammed on its retro thrusters, turned, and charged back into the fray, joined by another 100 warships that emerged from hiding places within Jupiter's stormy atmosphere. The Krill Grand Armada, overextended and caught in a perfect kill box, suddenly found itself fighting for its life. The river of warships had flowed into a meat grinder. The vanguard of the fleet was vaporized by the weaponized asteroids, while the rear was hammered by the ambushing human ships. The center, caught in the graviton minefield, found their ships being torn apart by shifting gravitational tides. Vorlag watched in disbelief as his glorious armada, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, was crippled and thrown into chaos in a matter of minutes. The Jupiter Gambit was a success. High Lord Vorlag roared in fury. The humans had tricked him, ambushed him, and were now bleeding his Grand Armada dry. Still, the sheer weight of his numbers was beginning to tell. The human ships were taking heavy losses, their defensive line buckling under the pressure of 1,000 Krill cruisers fighting for their lives. Vorlag's forces were mauled, but they were winning. He would break through the human trap, reach Earth, and burn it for this insult. On the bridge of the Vanguard, alarms blared as multiple human ships were destroyed. "Admiral, our lines are collapsing," Fleet Captain Rostova reported, her face grim. "We can't hold them for much longer. They're too numerous." Grand Admiral Thorne's expression was unreadable. He had known this moment would come. His fleet had done its job. They had lured the beast into the cage. Now it was time to introduce it to the other beast. "Ava," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "It's time. Authorize Project Chimera." Rostova stared at him, her eyes wide with the terrible understanding of what he was ordering. She had hoped it would never come to this. With a trembling hand, she entered her command codes into the master tactical console. "Project Chimera authorized," she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. "May God have mercy on our souls." Deep within the asteroid belt, a cloaked station, so secret that even most of Earth's high command was unaware of its existence, came to life. A colossal antenna array, miles across, began to glow with an unholy light. It was not a weapon, it was a beacon. It began to broadcast a single, impossibly powerful resonance signal across hyperspace, a signal calibrated to perfectly mimic the energy signature of the dormant cosmic entity slumbering within Viridian's crust. It was a fisherman's lure cast across the galaxy, and the bait was the promise of a feast. Miles away on Viridian, the real entity, partially stirred by the Krill's earlier bombardment, felt the call. It was a song it had not heard in eons, the echo of a sibling, a mate, another of its kind, and it was hungry. Back in the Sol system, the results were instantaneous and apocalyptic. Directly in the center of the Krill Grand Armada, space buckled. A hyperspace rift, far more vast and violent than the one the human fleet had used, tore open. It did not glow with energy. It was a vortex of absolute blackness, a hole in reality that drank the light of the stars. From this non-space, something emerged. It had no shape, no discernible form. It was a shifting, non-corporeal wave of pure entropy, a being of living gravitational distortion that warped light and time around it. The Krill fleet, which had been focused on the human ships, was caught, completely by surprise. The entity descended upon them, not with weapons, but with its very presence. A Krill dreadnought, its shields flaring, was simply unmade. Its atoms were pulled apart, its energy dissipated, its existence erased as if it had never been. Another ship was folded in on itself, crushed into a singularity by a localized gravity well. The entity did not attack. It merely consumed, feeding on the matter and energy of the ships with a terrifying, silent hunger. High Lord Vorlag watched, his mind finally breaking as he beheld a force beyond his comprehension. What is that?" he shrieked. He was no longer fighting a war against humans. He was trapped in a cage with a god of destruction. The humans hadn't just built a better trap, they had invited a cosmic horror to the slaughter. The cosmic entity was indiscriminate in its hunger, but it was drawn to the largest concentrations of energy. It swirled through the heart of the Krill Armada, unmaking cruisers and dreadnoughts, with terrifying ease. Amidst the chaos, High Lord Vorlag, his mind shattered by the horror he had witnessed, saw his only chance. His flagship, the inevitable Annihilation, though damaged, still had functioning engines. While the entity was distracted, he could make a run for the rift and escape, carrying a warning back to the hegemony. Admiral Thorne saw it too. "He's trying to bolt," he said, his voice grim. "He cannot be allowed to escape. They can't know what this thing is, or how to call it." "Admiral, our weapons are depleted," Rostova stated, her face pale. "The Vanguard is running on fumes." Thorne looked at the tactical display, at the fleeing Krill flagship, and the cosmic horror that was their unknowing temporary ally. He knew what had to be done. There was only one weapon he had left. His own ship. "Eva," he said, turning to his second-in-command. "It has been an honor serving with you. Get the escape pods away." "Sir?" "Marcus, no." "That is an order, Captain," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to the helm officer. "Lay in a collision course with the inevitable Annihilation. All remaining power to the forward engines." The UES Vanguard, the pride of the Terran fleet, surged forward one last time, a wounded lion making its final charge. It plowed through the debris field, shrugging off hits from panicked Krill point defenses, its destination absolute. It slammed into Vorlag's flagship with the force of a collapsing star. For a moment, the two Titans were locked together, and then the Vanguard's reactor went critical, engulfing both vessels in a silent, final, brilliant flash of light. With its primary target gone, the entity lingered for a moment. Then, as its ethereal prey faded, the rift it had used to enter the system wavered and collapsed, and the creature was gone. Silence descended upon the Sol system. Of the 3,000-ship Krill Grand Armada, nothing remained but wreckage and ghosts. Of the human fleet, less than 100 ships were still spaceworthy. Earth was safe. Humanity had survived. But as the battered fleet floated in the silent void, the galaxy was left to grapple with a new and terrifying truth. Humanity, the quiet upstarts from a forgotten corner of space, were not just warriors. They were a species willing to tear a hole in reality and unleash cosmic nightmares upon their enemies to ensure their own survival. And that was a more frightening prospect than any armada.